William Steinitz, the first world chess champion, always used to say one thing. You don't attack the king just because you feel like it. First, you have to destroy his position. In today's example, I'm going to show you how to do this so you can apply it in your own games, especially by really understanding what I'm explaining to you. In this game by Steinitz from more than 150 years ago, we'll understand it perfectly. The first world champion started with the king's pawn, e4, and his opponent replied with g6. We already have our first clue. Normally, our opponent will develop the bishop to g7 by fianchetto, probably develop this knight afterward, and castle. Well, I'm also going to show you some tips that will help you attack this kind of structure. You'll see that this video is extremely comprehensive, and if you're following along well, you'll get a lot out of it to use in your own games, as long as your opponent doesn't take over the center in the first few moves. For example, here, a common response would be e5, right? The double king's pawn, d5, even c5, the Sicilian defense. All of these would occupy the center. A move like g6 doesn't do that. What we need to do, obviously, is occupy the center with our two pawns. This is vitally important, okay? Why? Because the player who controls the center is the player who controls the position. I always use this example with my students, but it illustrates the point perfectly. Imagine that the chessboard is a mountain seen from above, okay? Where the four central squares are the top of the mountain. I don't know if you're following me. Whoever controls the top of the mountain controls all the sides. Very good. The game continues with bishop to g7. They start threatening the center from a distance, and even though it's still very well defended, the white pieces, Steinitz tries to defend it with a pretty solid pawn structure. This way, he makes sure to have an extremely strong center. Black continues with the double fianchetto. First, they wanted to do it on this side, and now they're going to do it on the other side. Look at what they're trying to do. They want to develop their bishop to b7, and now they would really be threatening one of our central pawns. This pawn wasn't being attacked very strongly because the queen defends it, and even the pawn as well. But as soon as they play bishop to b7, we'll have a serious threat. So we need to think prophylactically, meaning before our opponent moves, how are we going to defend it, right? So that it doesn't become a problem for us later. If you start thinking about your moves this way, you'll see that your games will go much better. You can do it with two logical moves. I wouldn't consider f3 at all. Why? Because we would be weakening our structure too much, and our king wouldn't be safe on either flank. Do you see it? We've weakened the queen side, but that's okay. We could castle short or maybe even long, but we wouldn't have as solid a structure as we would with both pawns advanced, you know? Try not to move so many pawns. So I would do it either with the bishop, right? Or I could also defend it with the knight from d2. But which one are we going to move? Which one do we choose? Well, here's a little trick, okay? When you're unsure about which piece to use for defense, let's see what positions each of these two pieces could go to. The bishop has 1, 2, 3, even 4 squares available. The knight only has 2, d2 and a3, but I would almost rule out a3 because it would be too far from the action, so it really only has one possible square. That's why, since this knight is almost certainly going to d2, what I would do is use it to defend the d4 pawn with the knight. However, what's the problem with that? Then now we wouldn't be able to develop the bishop. Well, of course, that's what Steinitz thought. Pay attention, okay? He wants to come attack my pawn, so he says, first I move the bishop, and when he attacks me, I move the knight to defend, and problem solved. And that's exactly what happened in the game. Did you understand this concept? This can really help you take advantage and develop your pieces in a super correct way. Very good. Black plays d6 to be able to develop their knight, to be able to fight for the center, which they still haven't done yet, right? And here, the player with the white pieces, world champion William Steinitz, develops his knight to f3. Maybe another way to take advantage of the fact that black isn't fighting for the center would have been to add more fuel to the fire with the f-pawn. This has its pros and cons. The pro is that we're occupying the center in an extremely strong way. The con is that we're weakening ourselves a lot and could get attacked. And even though it wouldn't be a big deal, honestly, it would be much easier for black to attack now than if the pawn were still on f2. You get it, right? Both moves are correct. Knight to f3 and e5, a key moment in the game. We have to decide whether to stay put, right? Because there's some tension here. What does tension mean? It means two pawns are threatening each other. This is what tension means in chess. They could capture us, we could capture them, we could stay put, or we could advance. What should we give? All right, let's think about it clearly. It's simple. If we capture, they'll recapture with the pawn, because they won't do it with the bishop since they'd lose it, right? This bishop is extremely good, and we could capture it with the knight. So almost for sure, if we capture, we already know they'll recapture with the pawn, and the position will look like this. If we advance, there are pros and cons again. Look, we have something really good, which is that we're trapping this bishop, right? But by defining the pawn structure, right? Why is the pawn structure defined? Because there are no possible exchanges at the moment. Black has a very strong counterplay, which is to attack the base of the pawn chain. If you've watched the Academy's classes, you'll understand this perfectly. The base is this d4 pawn. Therefore, counterplay with f5 would give black a comfortable counterplay, and we wouldn't want that, right? It might seem that the move d5 is good for us because we're gaining space and trapping the bishop, but we'd actually be giving black strong counterplay on the king side. But there's a move we really like, which is precisely to capture this pawn, and I'm going to explain why. Which piece do we still need to develop? The bishop, right? Where do we want to place it? Well, we have several possible options. Normally, we want to place it on c4, which is usually one of the best positions. And do you know why? Because it's threatening the weakest point in the position. And it's the weakest point in the position precisely because it's the only square on the whole board that's only defended by the king. That's why it's such a weak point. But of course, if we play bishop to c4, they're simply going to play e6, and this bishop won't do anything anymore. They could even block it completely, right? That's why now that they've played e5, it makes a lot of sense to put the bishop on c4, threatening the f7 square, right? So, we could do it right away, yes, but it would be even more interesting to eliminate the d-pawn, because then it won't be able to advance to block the bishop, and therefore, the correct option is to capture here and then develop the bishop to c4. Look at what an interesting thought that is. In these videos, we learn a lot about how to reason, don't we? So that our games turn out there. Now, all the pieces are developed really well. We can castle if we want on the next move. We could even castle long to place the rook on the same file as the queen. And our position it's attractive. Black's position, not so much, right? Especially because now they want to develop their knight in order to castle. And they can't do it with the usual knight to f6, because then they'd lose the d5 pawn, and there wouldn't be any sacrifices on e4 to recover it, since we could simply capture on f7, remember the weakest point in the position, making this fork and practically winning the game right away. Therefore, if they can't develop the knight via f6, they'll have to do it via e7. This is of vital importance. Now, I'm going to explain why, but first let's focus on the missed opportunity that Steinitz had here. For all of you who already have a deeper understanding of chess, you should try to find, right now, a winning combination for the white pieces. Steinitz played queen to e2 here, which makes a lot of sense. He's getting ready to castle long and put the rook on the same file as the queen. Does that make sense? You'll probably need to watch this video several times, okay? That's my recommendation, if you have the time, of course, because it has so many nuances that watching it multiple times will help them stick in your mind. This move makes a lot of sense if it weren't for the fact that there was already a winning move here, and I'm going to tell you what it is next. Bishop takes f7, a brutal bishop sacrifice, drawing the king to the f7 square, in other words, an attraction sacrifice. And once the king captures on f7, the game would continue as follows. Knight to g5, check, and when the king moves, queen to b3, and this position would be completely won for white. Steinitz didn't see about it. Look at what it's threatening. It's threatening queen to f7, check, and winning the bishop. It's threatening knight to e6, attacking the queen, and also threatening this square here, the bishop. It even threatens knight to f7, attacking the queen and the rook at the same time. There are so many threats that it would be impossible for black to defend against all of them at once. Alright? However, what happened? Steinitz didn't see this combination. The combination of bishop takes f7, a sacrifice to lure, and as I said, he played queen to e2. Pay attention. If even the world champion misses these combinations, it's completely normal for us to miss them too. And that is exactly the reason why we are going to focus our efforts on consistently maximizing our good moves and carefully minimizing our mistakes, right? You have to work on it little by little. Queen to e2 is a correct move, and the game continues with kingside castling. All right, this is a key moment in the game. Whenever you see a castling with a fianchetto, pay close attention to these, okay? If you're doing two things at once, just pay attention for a minute and then you can get back to whatever you were doing, okay? If you see a kingside or queenside castling, it doesn't matter which. With a fianchetto, you need to pay attention to whether they have the watchdog or if the alarm is set. Chess Stitcher, what are you telling me now? What is it? What nonsense are you telling me? All right, the watchdog, the alarm, the defender, call it whatever you want, is the knight on f6. It's vitally important that they have the knight on f6. In this case, they don't have it there. They have it on e7. But Chester's, come on, the position can't change that much. It can't be that they're lost. No, I'm not saying they're lost. I'm saying that now the game is going to get a lot more complicated for them simply because they don't have a knight on f6. Sometimes the knight has been developed via e7, sometimes the knight is on f6 and we manage to drive it away and we're in the same situation. Sometimes we've even managed to get rid of this knight through some exchanges, right? The important thing is to understand that this knight is not on f6. So that's when the alarm should go off and you should go for the Steinitz plan. What did Steinitz say? Your number? You don't attack the king just because. What we have to do first is destroy his position. And at this moment, since the knight isn't defending, we should go with the h-pawn. And this is something you need to have ingrained in your mind. And this position is already very, very delicate for the black pieces. Let's see how it continues. The knight on f6 would be defending the two key squares, h5 and g4, right? Preventing these kinds of breakthroughs because you could simply capture with the knight. With the knight on e7, the break on e5 is way too dangerous. Once we play h5, they won't be able to capture because then it opens up the column for the rook, the queen would come in, the knight would jump, and we'd deliver checkmate. So they should try to prevent this advance, right? The problem is they can't stop it either, and I'm sure many of you are thinking, just play h5 and that's it. Here, you simply break with g4, and the position is completely lost. No matter if the pawn is given away, the knight goes to h2. We're going to recapture here and then break through with h5, just like we were planning a moment ago. So we come to the conclusion that this h4 is already completely lethal and there's no way to stop it, or rather to stop this h5. Knight to d7. Careful, they're heading to f6. That's actually a good idea, but they're already way too late because we break through with h5 right away. Can they capture? Obviously not. Capturing would be a mistake. In fact, it wouldn't even be necessary to recapture with the rook. We could castle along, get ready, and then yes, capture, bring in the other rook, and this position would be a clear advantage for white. In fact, practically decisive. So what should they do? Well, in the worst case, they try to defend themselves now by putting the knight on f6. You know, right? When you play a fianchetto, be very careful and always put a knight on f6 before it's too late. At this point, it's already too late. All right, now we have to make a new decision. What do we do now? Do we take? Do we push the g-pawn to try to drive out the knight? Do we take this pawn? Do we push forward to delay the bishop's option? Well, basically what we want is the following. Taking the pawn would of course be good because we'd centralize the knight and threaten f7, but the best thing we can do is open the file for the rook. That is, capture on e. God, this is vitally important. We want to open the file for the rook because once it's open, the attack on h7 will already be lethal and unstoppable. And together with our knight and sometimes with our queen, when this knight isn't here, right? You see how important the knight on f6 is? It'll be completely decisive, right? So let's see now how black can continue. They could capture with the h-pawn, which is what we usually want. Remember that the ha and a pawns are the worst pawns in the whole position because they can only recapture inward and can't recapture outward. That's why it's said that all pawns are worth 1 point except for these side pawns, which are worth 0.7. So normally recapturing toward the center turns a 0.7 pawn into a 1 point pawn. But opening the entire file for the rook would be so dangerous that at this moment, it wouldn't be a good idea at all. So they'd like to capture with the f-pawn, but look at what our amazing bishop on c4 is doing. Do you see now how important it was to exchange on d5? That's why I'm telling you this video is worth saving and watching more than once, so you can try to understand it better each time. You see it, right? This bishop on c4 is now pinning the f7 square. They can't capture with the h-pawn, they can't capture with the f-pawn, so they sadly have to capture with the knight. And even though it might look like they have a solid defensive setup around their king with 2 knights and a bishop, right? We've destroyed their pawns, and now they just have 2 isolated pawns that are going to be way too weak and way too easy to attack. And I'm going to show you how Steinitz did it. At this point, it's true that you could go on the attack, but let's analyze a very interesting concept in the world of chess. Where do we want to castle? Kingside or queenside? Obviously queenside, because if we castle kingside now, look at what happens. We no longer have the open file for our rooks. In fact, we'd have to move the king back, and that would be pointless. It's better to castle queenside so we can, so we can bring our rooks over to this flank. Isn't that right? But of course, what's better for me? To go on the attack right away or to castle first? That's a question we can ask ourselves, right? Well, what you need to consider when you castle on opposite sides, that is, one side castles king side and the other queen side, is who will get to the attack first. In this case, it's clear that we're going to get there first. We already have everything set up to attack as soon as we jump in with the knight, for example, right? Meanwhile, our opponent is light years away from creating an attack. In a game with opposite side castling, sorry for banging on the table, in a game with castling on opposite flanks, the one who attacks first is going to win. Therefore, Steinitz castles queenside and knows he will be the first to attack. So first I castle, then I attack. And I also have this rook ready to jump onto the h file and cause some havoc, right? Black tries to counterattack on the queen side, which is exactly what they should do. But of course, they're already late. A move like h6, trying to stop the knight from jumping in, is simply punished with bishop takes. So there's no point in doing anything on the king side. They have to counterattack on the queen side. And now the knight jumps in, putting pressure on both h7 and f7. You'll see how important this finishing move is at the end. Now, could you kick out the knight with h6? Well, no, that wouldn't be a good move because simply a move like knight takes f7 or even bishop takes f7 would give white the win almost immediately because after the exchanges, king takes, we could just continue. I'm just making this up, okay? Improving our position with knight to c4, trying to break in through d5, and then bringing the queen in. And this would be, as you can check for yourselves, a huge and decisive advantage for white. That's why h6 is not a good move. So black has to settle for trying to attack on the queen side, against white's king from their own queen side. But as you can see, it's an attack that's just too slow. Careful, it's very slow, but now they really are threatening to start blocking us. Therefore, we need to be concise. And this is where white really slams their fist on the table. And the move that slams the table is this. I want to blow up the h7 square, and I want to eliminate the f6 square, because it's the best defender of the castling, right? This watchdog, this defense. And look how they do it with this wonderful combination. Knight takes on h7. We force black to capture the knight, because if not, we either take it ourselves or capture the rook, and on top of that, we're up a pawn. And now, rook sacrifice for the knight. It's true that we're losing material, but now we recover it with this queen to h5. Look at what a wonderful combination this is, huh? Try to understand it, rewind the video if you didn't get it, it's totally fine. That's the great thing about these videos. You can watch them as many times as you need. This knight will be recovered because when the king moves away, if we want, we can capture it. Remember, this pawn doesn't defend because it's pinned. Do you see it? Sorry, this bishop is here. It doesn't defend because it's completely pinned, right? So if we want, we can already capture this knight. We're down a rook. Okay. That's important, but when we capture this knight, we'll just be down the exchange. Do we care about having more material? No, because in opposite side castling, it's not the one with more material who wins, but the one who attacks first. That's why, before taking the knight, look, an in-between move. rook to h1, bringing another heady piece into the attack on the h7 square. You already know, for those of you who are in the academy, that Flavia has explained to us several times in several of the classes how to attack the opponent's castling, whether it's with a fianchetto, without a fianchetto, with the king here, or with the king there. Those of you who are in the academy already know this. If not, no problem. You can join. I'll leave the link in the description. And if you don't like it, I'll give you your money back. Look, now there's a mate threat on h7. How can they defend it? Well, there's only one way, because there's no piece that can come to defend h7. They can only play rook to e8 to try to escape with the king. Do you see it? So rook to e8 is the only move that lets black stay alive. And now what? Well, now it's time to, yes, now you can recapture this knight. Not just because you win a knight, but because you eliminate a defender and also threaten to come in here, and also threaten to come in here with mate on f7. We're about to deliver checkmate on the next move. Black has to defend, and they do so with queen to f6. Question, would it be a good idea to trade queens? Absolutely not. When we're offered a queen trade, which Flavia also explains, by the way. So Flavia, for those who don't know, is a titled teacher, a FIDE master at the academy, and she's an excellent instructor who uploads videos to the academy every week. She gave us a class on this, which you have saved inside, okay? From the academy to evaluate when it's in our favor and when it's not to trade piece. It's a fantastic 45-minute class. Right now, in case you haven't seen the class, I'll give you a very quick summary. It's not in our interest to trade queens. Why? Because we have the advantage in attack, so it's not in our favor, and we're down in materials, so it's also not in our favor. Alright? That's why we should avoid trading queens. However, here, white already has a winning combination to finish the game. Alright? Come on, do you want to try this last exercise? And for those who want to practice, pause the video and try to find it. I'm going to give the answer right now, okay? In case you haven't paused the video. The definitive answer here is the wonderful move bishop takes f7. And don't worry, I'm going to explain exactly why this move is winning. In the game, the logical move queen takes bishop was played, winning the piece. That's what happened in the game, alright? Let's see how it continues. But first, what happens if after this check you go for the other option, moving the king away? Simply, here, the white pieces would capture this rook, alright? Careful, now we have an extra knight, okay? We have an extra knight. If they trade queens with us, we have an extra piece, a game with a decisive advantage. Therefore, now it's them who don't want to trade queens. And if they capture here, the move rook to h8 is lethal, forcing black to either leave, then they'd lose the rook and obviously would have to resign, you see? Or they could capture here and then bishop to h6 would be lethal. You can't block here because I'll capture your queen and it's penned. You can't come over here because then I'll capture your queen, right? So rook to 8 would already be completely lethal. But what happens, that in this exact position, alright? For those of you who got lost, basically what happened was bishop takes f7. You remember, right? Black realizes they can't move the king away and takes the bishop, which is what happened in the game. But now here, last exercise, the decisive move to win the game is the following. Rook to h8 wins the game. You can't take with the RO with the bishop because it's pinned, and you can't move the king here or here, so you have to accept this rook sacrifice. And as you can see, we lure the king out and pull it away from defending the queen. And after this capture, the black piece is resigned. Did you understand the concept in this game? What a lesson, right? Spectacular. Make sure to save this video so you can watch it as many times as you need. If you want to study with my lessons, with Flavia's lessons, and with everything unlocked on ChessMind, which is the best app for studying chess, I highly recommend you join the academy. I recommend it 100%. Look, here's something. Of everyone who signs up monthly, about 80% switch to a quarterly or yearly plan. That means that once they join, they realize the incredible value and how fun it is to study at the academy, and they even improve their skills. So I'm going to leave the link for you down below in the description. If you're not convinced, I'll give you your money back, so you have nothing to lose by trying it. I recommend it 100%. Plus, right now, we have the launch price, right? And from there, you guys can do whatever you want, okay? I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed recording and explaining it. Leave a big like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll see each other tomorrow. As always, friends, in the next video. Goodbye.